Hello and a very warm welcome. You are watching the Weekly Brief, our weekly podcast on everything that happened in our newsroom, everything that happened in the country, everything that's likely to happen in the week ahead, and all that happened in the world as well. And it seemed that the entire world had descended on the Swiss Alpine mountains at Davos for the World Economic Forum. Well, it seems that the diplomatic ice over Greenland has thawed, but US still saying that it is going to strengthen its defense posture in the Greenland Arctic area. Well, very, very important speeches coming in, and of course we will come to Donald Trump. But first up, the exchange of jibes between world leaders at Davos. First, let's bring up what Mark Carney had to say and then what Emmanuel Macron had to say before we listen in to what Donald Trump's response was.
Powers have begun using economic integration as weapons, tariffs as leverage, financial infrastructure as coercion, supply chains as vulnerabilities to be exploited. You cannot live within the lie of mutual benefit through integration when integration becomes the source of your subordination.
We do believe that we need more growth, we need more stability in this world, but we do prefer respect to bullies, we do prefer science to plotism, and we do prefer rule of law to brutality.
So there was, of course, posturing there by NATO allies, which included, of course, Emmanuel Macron, and Mark Carney is saying that weaponization of tariffs is not something which is likely to go down. Well, that strong sort of retreat and the strong opposition to Donald Trump is something which was visible. Let's quickly listen into what Donald Trump also had to say before I introduce my guest once again and get into a larger discussion on what's happening over the Arctic Circle.
Canada gets a lot of freebies from us, by the way. They should be grateful also, but they're not. I watched your Prime Minister yesterday. He wasn't so grateful. But they should be grateful to us. Canada lives because of the United States. Remember that, Mark, the next time you make your statements. So when I called up Emmanuel Macron, I watched him yesterday with those beautiful sunglasses. What the hell happened?
All right, so global leaders there, what the hell happened? And you know, we've not just heard H words, we've also heard the F words.
That's right.
You know, exchanged
all
at
all
sort of explicit. So Rakesh Kar, editor News9, joining me on this podcast. Shweta Kothari, senior editor, with me as well, and I am Karthik Malhotra. Let's really get going into what has changed between US and its NATO allies, or has anything changed at all? And B, what is the future of Greenland here on? Rakesh, let me begin with you first.
Thanks, Karthik. I think first and foremost, you know, we are now an established formal announcement that Donald Trump is the world's unrivaled predatory hegemon.
All right.
And, you know, Davos, he's chosen
Just
Davos.
call him a bully. That's easy, right? Predatory hegemon.
Bully is still, you know, a lower end of a villain.
Okay.
And
right.
a predator, that too,
Sure.
a hegemon, you know, I think these two adjectives, in the negative sense, define Trump as he's going around.
Okay.
He could be worse off, we don't know.
Yeah.
So, but I'm happy that the world got a voice, at least some leaders got a voice to repel him, at Davos. So
Right.
that's a significant thing, as you pointed out, and we showed those bites from these three important leaders.
Yeah.
There is a collateral damage. Trump has withdrawn the invitation to Canada to be part of the peace board
of Peace,
so-called peace
right.
board. So in that sense, two major takeaways from Davos. One, that, you know, Trump will be repelled at some extent.
Right.
And the relationship between EU and US, which used to be, you know, defined as extremely cordial all these decades, isn't for a major change.
Right. So
and, second.
Go ahead.
And second, that, you know, this the globalization is dead. Trump chose Davos, which was, so to say, the capital of globalization, and said that, you know, I am the captain of all the companies, especially in the US, and this vote is against globalization, means, you know, transnational, transatlantic companies, and now Trump will decide which American companies will invest where, or if at all it is allowed to invest.
Right. So, you know, one would have expected, Shweta, that there is going to be this widening of the rift between EU and US. But then with this pushback of EU and with Donald Trump also backing down, A, on using military force to acquire Greenland, and B, also saying that that there is going to be no more additional tariff on its NATO allies over the Greenland issue. Overall, one would say that this rift, which could have widened, has actually narrowed, hasn't it?
It has narrowed, but it
optics
has narrowed
only.
in optics. I agree there
Okay.
completely. But let's also take our viewers back the precursor to Davos. We've seen some very difficult exchanges, and for the very first time, I think, in the history of the world, since NATO came into effect, we saw leaders coming out in open talking about US
Right.
in a bad light.
Right.
We saw, of course, it all came from Donald Trump to begin with, where he said that he's going to use force, if possible, both economic and military, to get hold of Greenland, what he's calling as a big, beautiful piece of ice. And we all
Yeah.
know it's more important than
He
that.
also called it Iceland, by the way.
He's called it Iceland multiple times.
Yeah.
And that's not just a slip of tongue you expect from a US president. But, overall, there was a lot of pushback, as you mentioned, from European leaders, from NATO allies. For the very first time, NATO was at the risk of disintegration.
Right.
And that had a lot of heads rolling, and a lot of senior officials were given to understand in the US administration worried as to what really happens if European Union and US are at loggerheads going forward into the future. But then came the tariff. And the moment Donald Trump said, I'm going to levy tariff to the tune of 10%, and I think that was the breaking point. And Europe pushed back. You
Right.
had Mark Carney talk the way
Correct.
he talked
The
about the
Canadian Prime
US,
Minister.
and then he talked, and then you had Emmanuel Macron throwing a shade, quite literally, with his $12,000, the sunglasses that he wore at Davos, which also
Which
became,
Donald Trump did not appreciate at
which
all.
he didn't like at all, and which also became a point of conversation at Davos. But
Right.
finally, when we heard from Donald Trump, he made a few things very clear. A, there's not going to be any military involvement, at least when it comes to outright war,
Yeah.
and B, he's going to take the tariff threat back. He's
Absolutely.
rolled back on that
Absolutely.
tariff threat. And I think that, in a way, has thawed the relationship for now, but it's all in optics.
I don't know.
Karthik, but
If I were
he hasn't laid his hands off Greenland. Is today's
Yeah.
latest
No doubt.
statement?
But he's going to work with NATO.
But,
he's
you know,
going to
that's
work,
again a
and NATO
facade. That's again a
includes
facade,
the kingdom of Denmark. They are all going
Denmark
to
has
work
said that
together.
we're not part of it.
Sure, but
Yeah.
I'm saying the entire kingdom of Denmark, NATO allies, US are all going to work together to strengthen defense at the Greenland Arctic Circle,
No, but
which
he's saying I
protects
still-
Europe and also protects North
No,
America.
Karthik, there's a definite statement that I'm going to get Greenland for US. Whatever it takes.
That's
military, non-military,
He's not
diplomacy.
using military. His
That is saying
his
I'm not-
economic
No,
his
Karthik, he's saying
economics
I'm
are
not
not
using
working
military
out.
for now.
It doesn't matter.
He's saying I will
I'm saying
not
at
use
the
it
end of
in
the
the
day-
interim, but he's not ruling it out completely.
Sure, he
But
says
at the
he
same
needs
time,
Greenland for
at any
protecting the interest
Whatever
of
it
the
takes.
USA.
Whatever it takes.
But at the end of the day, he is working now with NATO allies who are all going to park their
haven't
defense
heard from NATO.
infrastructure.
No, we haven't
Of
heard
course,
from
of course,
NATO.
Germany is parking its resources. France is parking its resources. NATO countries are parking
That's right.
their defense resources at
Ranging
Greenland,
from 1
overall,
to 12 to
working for the
15.
national security, not just of the US, but also of Europe as a whole. So what I'm trying to arrive at is that this transatlantic rift that we were seeing between US and EU, things are pretty much almost exactly the same as they were before Donald Trump started talking about
No, there's
Greenland,
a pause.
except for more military stations being built
That's
at
right. So
Greenland.
there is a pause
No,
in
but finally, who
tensions.
takes
But
control
there
of
is an
Greenland? All
underlying
this is
tension.
fine. This is a means to an end.
Right. So I'm
the
saying-
end is that he wants Greenland in the US Charter.
Sure,
That
he
remains
does. That
the
is his
agenda.
intention. That
Let's
has
not
been
forget the
his
flag,
stated.
which also included Canada, by the way.
That's
Of
right.
course.
Yeah.
So he wants Greenland. He stated his intention right pretty much from the day he entered the Oval Office for the second time on the 20th of Jan 2025. But all I'm trying to arrive at is that in the last 1 year, and especially in the last 2 weeks, if you look at things dispassionately right now, nothing has changed over Greenland except for the fact that Donald Trump has reiterated his intention to take Greenland. He has ruled out use of military force, but you have NATO allies, the Kingdom of Denmark, as well as US, all parking more infrastructure in Greenland.
Military mobilization.
Military mobilization, although not leading, at least stated intention, not leading towards hostile
But
acquisition.
let me then bring you back to Venezuela. It
I want to
all
come to the
started
fact-
with mobilization of
I
military
think we discussed it last time also.
And
with
then
a minus military option doesn't take away
I
the,
am
you
not
know,
discounting
the
that.
illogical.
I'm not
the minute you
discounting
have
that.
a military build-up, it only takes a fraction of moment before
Absolutely.
an all-out war to start.
Ladies and gentlemen, what I want to arrive at is that with this more military mobilization towards Greenland, are we likely to expect a response from Russia or China? Or are they going to play it easy? Are they going to be cool about the fact that there is more focus on Greenland, which becomes a vital trade route in any case for Russia and China to use? What is the reaction going to happen now?
They would sit silent, because they are intended and stated to be the two key players.
So where is the story going from here? Is the story going to go towards more mobilization of Russian and Chinese fleet in the Arctic Circle, and now with defense forces of NATO and US both occupying Greenland, or at least being more visible in Greenland, are we likely to see some action in 2026?
There may be.
There may be.
You can't rule it out.
You can't rule it out.
So, here's my 2 bits. The minute there is military mobilization, as there's large presence of forces, both from the US as well as from NATO allies, there is a chance going forward that if the military posturing continue, this could end up being an all-out war sort of scenario, with US trying to actively occupy Greenland, because Donald Trump has said it, he wants Greenland and he's ready to pay any cost.
So Rakesh, if war becomes one of the tentacles that this entire conversation and this entire diplomacy and military branches out towards, isn't that going to further strengthen the entire NATO construct?
We hope so, because ultimately the bully is at work and people are climbing down 3 steps forward, 4 steps backward. That is the global diplomacy today, because Trump has all the cards. I want you to spend a little time on this so-called peace board, which is again a sham, and I think India has greater challenges looking at the composition of the board. Now 2 key factors there. One, that none of the G7 countries is a signatory as of now, except US, of course. And none of the Security Council members is a signatory. But the entire Muslim Federation is part of it. And, look at the entire construct.
But Rakesh,
no
of course, we have deviated from Greenland. So let's spend a minute on the Board of Peace. That's fine. So, I want to, at the end of the day, what happens in the Gulf, what happens in the Middle East or West Asia, depending on where you're seeing it from, is more likely to attract interest from resident players there, isn't it? While I understand Pakistan is not technically part of the Middle East, but Muslim nations, Islamic nations obviously have a lot more to gain with peace in that region than non-Muslim nations, including the G7.
No, that's fine, but they haven't yet signed up. And the truth is that, India,
many of them may, because they would see business interests, capitalist interests there. But at the end of the day, it is going to be the Muslim nations which are going to derive the most benefit from lasting peace in the Middle East.
The idea itself, the idea undermines.
And incidentally, it's not just the Muslim nations; it's also Israel. Israel has also signed up for the deal, and Russia and Russia has also signed up.
Likely,
Russia is also
not formally yet signed.
If I'm not mistaken, Russia has evinced interest. Russia has evinced interest to sign up.
Russian President, as of yesterday morning, has clearly stated that I haven't agreed yet.
Now look at the construct, Karthik. I want you to take back to the construct. Gaza is not even mentioned in this so-called peace board. It's a plan for Gaza. And Trump's family, relatives, all of them are part of it. What is his son-in-law doing there? What are his credentials for peace? And then also the fact of the matter is that India has taken so far the right decision by not being part of it. We have seen the Pakistani, general and the Prime Minister there, and they're begging money from IMF, but they are ready to pay $1 billion.
Absolutely. Where is that $1 billion going to come from? That $1 billion is going to come pretty much from the same IMF $2 billion loan that was lent out to them.
So coincidentally, India is hosting the Arab League nation leaders on January 30 and 31st to discuss Gaza.
Absolutely.
So I want to, all eyes on that, because India has not seized of the role it has to play in peacekeeping, but not under that,
and as far as NATO is concerned, you asked a pointed question whether this is going to strengthen NATO. I beg to differ. I think there is no NATO without the US.
And NATO is getting weakened every second, whether it is in the frame or it's not in the frame.
For its own
but this peace board is not an alternative to NATO.
No, the peace board could potentially be an offset to UN, some charter around peace, but obviously not a replacement for NATO.
It's like, I'm the captain, I'm the judge, I'm the judiciary, I'm the executioner, it is US.
No doubt about that, and you gave him a nice predatory capitalist hegemon term for that. But what I was trying to arrive at towards the end of this discussion was the fact that whatever Donald Trump is doing, at the end of the day, the intentions sound selfish. They are, no doubt about it. The sort of, the action that he takes, not just, diplomatic action, military action, what he says by way of the words coming out of his mind, of his mouth, at the end of the day, no matter the selfish interest behind what Donald Trump does, no matter how many people he pisses off in the bargain, at the end of the day, the world gets closer together. And look at the India-EU FTA.
Absolutely.
It was stuck for so many years. It would not have gone through had it not been for Donald Trump and had it not been for his tariff.
That's
so
a
that is what we will.
collateral.
That is what we will discuss in the other segment. We will slip into a very short break. But the India-EU FTA likely to be announced on the 27th of Jan at the EU-India summit. That on the other side of the break. You are watching the Weekly Brief.